June 15, 1933, St. Paul, Minnesota. At precisely 12:45 p.m., William Hamm Jr. emerged from the massive oak doors of the Theodore Hamm Brewing Company's administrative building. His linen suit, pale and impeccably tailored, reflected the oppressive heat of an already sweltering summer day. The thermometer had climbed to 28 degrees Celsius, and a heavy, sticky haze clung to the city, muffling its usual hum. Hamm was in no rush. He was 40 years old, president of one of the largest brewing companies in the United States, and every day of his life followed a rigid, almost monarchical routine. Every afternoon, at exactly this time, he would walk from his office to the family mansion atop Greenbrier Hill, a short distance from the factory. It was a ritual, a statement of wealth and power, a silent assertion that this land, these streets, these buildings all belonged to the Hamm legacy. Workers bustled around him. Trucks arrived with crates of beer freshly legalized. And yet, despite the chaotic activity, no one dared disturb him. He felt invincible, untouchable. He had grown up inside this empire, understood every brick and beam, every cog in the production line, every secret passage that made the beer he oversaw a national treasure. And yet, just a dozen steps from the intersection of Minnehaha Avenue and Greenbrier Street, a black Hudson sedan glided silently to the curb. Its engine whispered instead of roared, and the windows were rolled down. A young man stepped from the car, slender, pale, his smile polite and almost shy. He drew no weapon, shouted no threats. He simply extended his hand. The instinct of a gentleman overrode instinct of self-preservation. William Hamm Jr., trusting and habitual, shook the hand, and in that single contact, reality fractured. The handshake tightened with iron force, the polite smile vanished, replaced by a calculating, cruel grimace. Alvin Karpass, known in criminal circles as Creepy, had arrived. The rear doors of the Hudson flung open. Two large men, including Arthur, Doc, Barker, descended onto the asphalt. They seized Hamm, pulling him violently into the back seat, his feet lifted off the ground. A brutal strike to the solar plexus, knocking the air from his lungs. The world became a press of gasoline and leather against his face. A dense white canvas sack smothered his head, darkness swallowing him whole. "Keep quiet, or I'll blow your brains out," hissed a voice, the cocking of a .45 caliber revolver sounding ominously close. In less than 45 seconds, William Hamm Jr., once untouchable, king of industry, heir to a dynasty, had vanished from the streets of St. Paul. This was no ordinary kidnapping. It shattered the city's delicate equilibrium. St. Paul, under Police Chief John O'Connor, had long functioned as a haven for criminals. They could walk the streets freely, lodge in hotels, and spend their ill-gotten gains, provided they committed no crimes within city limits. A tacit, corrupt agreement held sway. Gangsters and magnates walked the same streets, separated only by mutual understanding. But the Karpass gang had destroyed that unspoken pact. They had sent a black Hudson through the invisible wall, separating legality from lawlessness. Inside the car, Hamm suffocated beneath the sack, the heat oppressive, the knowledge of his vulnerability sinking in. His fortune, his empire, his identity, all now reduced to leverage for ransom. The sum demanded, $100,000 in cash, was astronomical in 1933, equivalent to millions today. And yet, to fully grasp why William Hamm Jr. became the target that broke decades of criminal neutrality, one must look back, not at his fall, but at his rise. The story began 68 years earlier, in 1865, when Theodore Hamm, a German immigrant from the Boden region, arrived in Minnesota. Theodore Hamm was not a brewer by trade. He was a pragmatic butcher, a boarding house owner, a man of calculation and toughness. He understood the law of survival in the wild frontier. It was not the strongest, but the most calculating who endured. When a local brewer defaulted on a loan, Theodore did not seek glory. He took the brewery and land, laying the foundation for a dynasty built on strategy, not sentiment. The brewery he acquired produced a mere 500 barrels a year, but Theodore saw potential missed by others. He recognized that St. Paul rested atop soft sandstone, that underground temperatures remained constant, ideal for beer maturation. While competitors spent fortunes on ice, Theodore dug. Pickaxes and shovels carved subterranean labyrinths that would become the heart of the Hamm fortune. By the late 19th century, the Hamm Brewing Company was more than a factory. It was a city-shaping institution, a fortress of red brick and smoke, stacked chimneys dominating the landscape. William Hamm Jr. was born into this mechanism in 1893, raised within its disciplined, orderly world. When he assumed leadership in 1930, the timing could not have been worse. The Great Depression was ravaging America. Prohibition was still in effect, and countless breweries had failed. Yet the Hamms survived. Their second strategy revealing itself adaptation. They shifted to malt syrup production, industrial alcohol under government contracts, preserving staff, equipment, and capital. By 1933, the moment Roosevelt repealed the beer ban, Hamm Brewing was ready to dominate where competitors lagged. Trucks carried beer across a thirsty nation, and William Hamm Jr., emblem of unsinkability, became a target. Hamm's routines made him predictable, a vulnerability in a world that no longer respected old conventions. The Barker, Karpas gang, and their corrupt inside ally, former St. Paul Police Chief Thomas Archibald Brown, exploited this. Brown, head of the anti-kidnapping squad, provided intelligence, ensured patrols were absent, and effectively delivered Hamm into criminal hands. What followed was 6 days of psychological torment in Bensonville, Illinois, where Hamm was reduced to a human commodity. His days measured only by the opening of a door, the offer of food or water, the turning of a key. Every order he had ever issued now rendered meaningless. His only currency became survival. The ransom, 100 zalozen in cash, was delivered with the meticulous cruelty of Karpas's strategic mind. Hamm's friend and vice president, William Dunn, navigated a tortuous delivery route around St. Paul, ensuring no tail followed him. The money passed from a world of creation to one of destruction, funding weapons, fast cars, and terror. When Hamm was released, the psychological scars remained. His trust in the world shattered, his perception of safety irrevocably altered. Yet this tragedy had unintended consequences. The ransom notes, soaked with the sweat of both Hamm and his captors, became a forensic key. In Washington, the FBI, under the ambitious eye of J. Edgar Hoover, applied the silver nitrate method, revealing fingerprints invisible to traditional methods. Arthur, Doc, Barker, and Alvin Karpas were identified scientifically for the first time. This marked the end of the Ockner system, exposing systemic corruption in St. Paul and heralding a new era where science, rather than brutality or wealth, would enforce justice. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Barker was sent to Alcatraz, Karpas captured in New Orleans, and incarcerated for decades. Thomas Brown dishonorably dismissed. The Hamm Empire endured, though William Hamm Jr. never fully recovered his sense of security. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill was eventually demolished, the brewery closed and abandoned. Yet the legacy of the kidnapping endured far beyond the streets of St. Paul. It was in the fingerprints, the scientific breakthroughs, the ushering in of forensic modernity. Hamm's ordeal became a cornerstone in the evolution of law enforcement, where the invisible left a permanent mark, and science triumphed over brute force. In this story, the lesson is profound: wealth, power, and predictability can be destroyed in moments, but knowledge, innovation, and understanding of human and scientific systems leave lasting legacies. William Hamm Jr., though physically unharmed, gave the world a gift far beyond beer, a path into the era of forensic certainty, of measurable justice, and the understanding that every action, every touch, leaves a trace. The day William Hamm Jr. was kidnapped, the streets of St. Paul remained eerily oblivious. People went about their routines, unaware that one of the city's wealthiest men had vanished in broad daylight. Yet for those who had eyes to see, subtle disturbances rippled across the urban fabric. Drivers noted the sudden silence at intersections where the Hudson sedan had glided by. Street vendors sensed an unusual tension, and the servants at the brewery whispered among themselves, careful to avoid being overheard by any curious eye. Hamm's abduction was more than a criminal act. It was a rupture in the city's social order, a demonstration that no matter the wealth or influence, life could be abruptly and violently altered. Inside the Black Hudson, the atmosphere was suffocating. Hamm's mind raced, shifting from disbelief to fear, and then to a quiet, creeping calculation. He assessed his options. The sack over his head muted sound, but he could feel the vehicle's motion, the subtle changes in acceleration, the turns, the stops. He registered the weight and presence of the men around him, the strength in their grips, the inevitability of their control. For someone who had spent his life commanding factories, managing finances, and issuing orders with the confidence of authority, this was a confrontation with powerlessness. Every muscle in his body, trained over decades for strength and discipline, now offered him nothing but the raw awareness of vulnerability. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the Hamm mansion, chaos of a different kind unfolded. The staff, loyal yet fearful, acted on carefully rehearsed routines in the absence of their master. Food preparations were adjusted, doors were locked, and a coded system of signals and communication was deployed to ensure no outsiders interfered. The mansion, usually a place of predictability and control, now became a web of tense activity, each servant silently hoping to maintain order while fearing reprisal. The very walls of the house, built thick to symbolize permanence and protection, seemed to close in with an unspoken understanding. The presence of one absent individual could unsettle the world entirely. William Hamm Jr.'s captivity lasted 6 days, but within that short span, the experience became a crucible of fear, uncertainty, and psychological manipulation. The kidnappers, masters of both calculation and intimidation, subjected him to a meticulous regimen designed to dissolve his confidence. Windows were permanently sealed. Days and nights merged into indistinguishable cycles. Conversations were limited to the bare minimum required for sustenance. Even movement was restricted, measured, and controlled. The vast estate he had once commanded now existed only in memory, replaced by the dark, claustrophobic confines of a suburban hideout far from St. Paul. The criminal operation was executed with precision reminiscent of military planning. Alvin Karpas coordinated logistics, timing, and routes with the assistance of Thomas Brown, the very police official tasked with preventing such abductions. Every turn was anticipated, every contingency prepared for. Hamm's predictable routines, once a mark of order, now facilitated his vulnerability. The criminal intelligence network surrounding the Barker, Karpas gang ensured that the FBI would be delayed, misdirected, and ultimately reliant on emerging forensic techniques to uncover the truth. For Hamm, survival became a mental exercise. He learned to ration strength, to anticipate moods and behaviors, to read the flickers of intent in his captor's expressions. Every sound, the scrape of a shoe against floorboards, the faint creak of a door, the subtle vibration of a gun cocking, was information. He began to calculate not just how to survive physically, but psychologically, preserving a sense of agency amid overwhelming constraint. In a sense, the ordeal transformed him, revealing both the fragility of human certainty and the latent capacity for resilience. Meanwhile, in Washington, the FBI mobilized. The kidnapping, while initially shrouded in secrecy, had far-reaching implications. This was no ordinary crime. It was a challenge to the authority of law itself. J. Edgar Hoover, driven by a desire to prove the efficacy of federal law enforcement, pushed forward with emerging techniques of forensic identification. Among these was the use of silver nitrate to detect latent fingerprints, a method that would become a cornerstone of criminal science. The ransom notes, touched and rewritten under stress, contained fingerprints invisible to the naked eye. This invisible evidence became the linchpin for unraveling the Barker, Karpas gang's carefully constructed network. The science of investigation intersected with the art of criminal psychology. Analysts began to piece together behavior patterns, communication styles, and methods of concealment. Each trace, however small, was a revelation. Karpas, meticulous and cunning, had left evidence in his attempts to manipulate timing, routes, and delivery logistics. Barker, brutal and impulsive, left traces of aggression in the handling of Hamm and in conversations overheard by surveillance. Brown, the corrupt official, had underestimated the reach of federal investigation and the precision of forensic methodology. Within months, the kidnappers' network was exposed, and justice began its slow, methodical course. While these events unfolded externally, the internal narrative of the Hamm family remained constrained. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill continued its silent vigil, absorbing the tension and the weight of secrecy. Long corridors, once echoing with footfalls of servants and staff, now held only anticipation and uncertainty. Rooms previously filled with music, laughter, and commerce were reduced to spaces of quiet observation. The very walls seemed to internalize the ordeal, shaping the experience of everyone who lived or worked within them. In this way, the mansion itself became a character, a silent witness to both privilege and vulnerability, absorbing and retaining the psychological resonance of a family crisis concealed from public view. Upon his release, William Hamm Jr. returned physically unharmed, yet profoundly altered. The streets of St. Paul, once familiar, now seemed threatening. Trust, previously assumed as a natural extension of social and economic authority, had been eroded. Each handshake, each interaction, each routine action carried the weight of potential danger. Yet, in the aftermath of trauma, Hamm found purpose. He documented He recounted. He participated in the forensic process that would ultimately dismantle the network of kidnappers. His ordeal became a template for law enforcement and criminology, emphasizing the interplay of psychology, routine, and scientific investigation in understanding and preventing crime. The historical context of the kidnapping is critical to understanding its significance. America in 1933 was a nation emerging from the depths of the Great Depression, its social and economic structures strained, its political systems in flux, and its law enforcement still adapting to the challenges of modern organized crime. Prohibition had created opportunities for criminal enterprise, while simultaneously demonstrating the limitations of local and municipal authority. The Hamm kidnapping exemplified the intersection of wealth, crime, and systemic corruption, exposing the vulnerabilities of a city and nation still grappling with the aftereffects of economic collapse and social upheaval. The family's history, stretching back to Theodore Hamm's arrival in 1865, provided both context and contrast. Theodore, a German immigrant, had built the brewery through discipline, strategic foresight, and practical ingenuity. Subterranean tunnels, carefully engineered to maintain consistent temperatures, allowed the brewery to mature beer efficiently, giving the Hamm enterprise a distinct advantage over competitors. These tunnels, symbolic of both ingenuity and control, reflected the broader philosophy of the family: mastery over environment, manipulation of resources, and preservation of legacy at all costs. William Hamm Jr.'s kidnapping represented a rupture in that legacy. Where his grandfather had controlled space, labor, and production, William encountered an environment entirely hostile to his usual methods of control. Every instinct honed in the management of industry became irrelevant. The ordeal revealed the limits of wealth and influence when confronted with cunning, coordination, and the audacity of criminal enterprise. Yet it also revealed resilience, adaptability, and the capacity for survival under conditions of extreme constraint. The aftermath of the crime reshaped St. Paul, the Hamm family, and the emerging field of forensic investigation. It marked the end of an era where criminals could operate with impunity within the city's borders. It underscored the importance of federal authority, scientific methodology, and the interconnection of psychology, routine, and behavior in understanding criminal enterprise. For William Hamm Jr., it was an experience that redefined his understanding of power, control, and human vulnerability. For the nation, it was a catalyst in the evolution of criminal investigation and legal accountability. The mansion, now silent once again, stood as a testament to both resilience and concealment. It had absorbed decades of wealth, influence, and privilege, but also the trauma of a high-profile crime. Its walls, corridors, and hidden chambers retained the memory of events unseen by the public, shaping the lives of those within and surrounding it. To this day, historians, investigators, and narrators reflect on its story, not merely as a case of criminal ingenuity, but as a lesson in the fragility of human certainty, the consequences of power, and the lasting impact of secrets kept behind locked doors. The mansion atop Greenbrier Hill, long before the kidnapping, had earned a reputation both admired and feared. To the public, it was a symbol of success, an emblem of the American dream realized. Its towering stone walls and intricate iron gates spoke of permanence, wealth, and stability. Yet for those who lived within its halls, it was far more complex, a labyrinth of control, expectation, and isolation. Each room was meticulously planned, each corridor engineered to guide movement and behavior. Windows were positioned not only for aesthetics, but for surveillance. Floorboards were reinforced to transmit vibrations, alerting staff to the approach of unauthorized persons. In every architectural decision, there was purpose, privacy, power, and the subtle, unrelenting assertion that the house itself belonged to its master. Within these walls, William Hamm Jr. had spent his formative years. He learned discipline not from punishment alone, but from observation, the steady, unyielding presence of family members who measured time, resources, and loyalty with mathematical precision. Meals were consumed at prescribed intervals, conversations were moderated, and deviations from schedule were discouraged. Guests, when allowed, were closely observed. Outsiders rarely penetrated beyond the formal reception rooms, and extended family members were made acutely aware of hierarchy, inheritance, and expectation. In this environment, the concept of security was both literal and symbolic. To be untouchable, one had to be predictable, cautious, and controlled at all times. Yet this very predictability became William's vulnerability. The very routines that shaped his efficiency also made him a target. The kidnappers understood this instinctively. Alvin Karpas and his cohort had studied the Hamm family for months, noting the patterns, behaviors, and schedules. They recognized the mansion's strengths and weaknesses, identifying precisely when William would be most exposed. The audacity of entering the city and intercepting him in broad daylight reflected not only criminal courage, but an understanding of human psychology. The more ordered a life, the easier it could be disrupted with precision. Once in captivity, the mansion became a distant memory, replaced by the oppressive, windowless hideout where days blurred into nights. Hamm was deprived not only of freedom, but of sensory orientation, a tactic designed to erode his confidence and test the limits of endurance. Food was provided sporadically, conversation was limited, and threats were communicated in whispers, subtle enough to unsettle, yet too ambiguous to provoke immediate reaction. Every moment was calculated to destabilize. Even when physical harm was not applied, the psychological impact was profound. During these days, Hamm reflected on the nature of control. He realized that wealth, influence, and reputation could be rendered meaningless by a few individuals operating outside societal norms. The breweries he oversaw, the warehouses filled with barrels of malt and hops, the iron and stone that had seemed eternal, all could be undermined in a matter of moments. And yet, he also discovered a resilience within himself, a capacity for observation, calculation, and patience honed over years of disciplined upbringing. Each sound, each movement, each fleeting gesture of his captors was a data point, a piece of intelligence he cataloged with meticulous care. Meanwhile, the public narrative of the Hamm family remained carefully curated. At the brewery and within the mansion, life was maintained as though nothing had occurred. Staff were instructed to follow routines, suppress emotion, and project normalcy. Supplies continued to be delivered, meetings continued as scheduled, and the exterior facade of success and control remained unblemished. Outsiders, seeing only what the family allowed, had no reason to suspect the trauma unfolding behind the mansion walls. This duality, the maintenance of public order while private chaos raged, reflected a central theme in the Hamm legacy: appearances were paramount, and reality was secondary. The kidnapping also illuminated the limits of local authority. St. Paul had long been known for a delicate balance between criminal enterprise and municipal oversight. The Oconor system, an unwritten arrangement of mutual tolerance, had allowed organized crime to flourish without disrupting public order. The Hamm kidnapping shattered that equilibrium, demonstrating that wealth could not always shield against external threats and that the illusion of safety was fragile. In response, federal agencies became more assertive, emphasizing science, forensics, and interjurisdictional cooperation over traditional methods of policing. Back in captivity, Hamm's experience became a study in human behavior under duress. He observed the interactions among his captors, noting hierarchy, aggression, and hesitation. Alvin Karpas exhibited meticulous control, orchestrating the plan with strategic foresight. Arthur Barker displayed bursts of impulsive violence, a reminder that unpredictability could undermine even the most careful planning. The dynamic between captors created a subtle psychological environment in which Hamm had to navigate not only physical restriction, but also the moods, tempers, and power struggles of those controlling him. Every response, every hesitation, had consequences. By the fourth day, Hamm's reflections shifted toward survival strategy. He recognized that compliance, observation, and mental calculation were more valuable than resistance. He cataloged their routines, the timing of meals, the intervals of rest, and the methods of intimidation. Each observation allowed him to preserve mental equilibrium, transforming fear into situational awareness. In a confined, powerless state, knowledge became agency. The very act of observing became a way of asserting some control over an uncontrollable situation. Outside the immediate environment, the investigation proceeded with a rigor previously unseen in the field of federal law enforcement. J. Edgar Hoover, determined to establish the FBI as a credible national authority, emphasized the scientific examination of evidence. The use of latent fingerprint detection, handwriting analysis, and behavioral profiling represented a turning point in criminal investigation. Each trace of human activity, smudged ink, a partial fingerprint, an overlooked object, was leveraged to reconstruct the sequence of events leading to Hamm's abduction. In this sense, the crime itself became a catalyst for innovation, transforming the practice of law enforcement and setting new standards for evidence collection and analysis. As the narrative unfolded, the public became aware only of fragments. News reports emphasized the mystery, the drama, and the eventual resolution. But details of the trauma, psychological manipulation, and personal reflection remained obscured. The Hamm family, protective of both reputation and privacy, managed external perception with precision. Their ability to maintain dignity and control in the public eye, even amid private chaos, reinforced the perception of invulnerability. Even as the reality within the mansion revealed fragility. The mansion itself, throughout this period, stood as both witness and participant. Its architecture, designed for control, observation, and permanence, now contained echoes of trauma, fear, and heightened awareness. Hallways once filled with routine footsteps became silent. Corridors previously measured and predictable absorbed tension. And rooms once vibrant with activity were empty, but for the weight of memory. In the aftermath, the house retained an almost sentient presence, a reflection of the events it had contained. and the secrets it had silently guarded. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill, though publicly admired for its grandiose architecture and imposing stone facade, concealed layers of secrecy that few ever noticed. To the casual observer, the house was simply an emblem of success. Tall windows framed by carved stone, sprawling lawns dotted with sculpted gardens, and a towering entryway that commanded respect. But to those who knew its history, or had lived within its walls, the mansion was a carefully orchestrated instrument of control. Every hallway, every staircase, every archway had been designed with precision, not only to impress, but to monitor influence, and, if necessary, isolate. Beneath the mansion, an intricate network of tunnels, ice storage rooms, and hidden chambers reflected Theodore Hamm's obsession with efficiency and discretion. These spaces, originally designed to maintain the perfect temperature for beer maturation, became metaphors for the family's philosophy. The unseen was often more important than the seen, and control over hidden spaces meant mastery over outcomes. In a symbolic sense, these subterranean corridors mirrored the layers of secrecy in the Hamm family's social and emotional life. Few visitors ever glimpsed the cellars, and even fewer understood their scale. The tunnels stretched beneath the property, interlinking storage rooms, staff quarters, and emergency exits, creating an invisible web of movement and surveillance. William Hamm Jr., during his captivity, could not have imagined the complexity of the mansion he had grown up in. Yet, in the stark confines of the hideout, the lessons of observation, patience, and careful calculation that had been drilled into him as a child became his tools for survival. He reflected on the contrast. The mansion had been a place of authority, control, and predictable routines. The Hudson sedan and the small, windowless room of captivity represented the chaotic inversion of that order. The psychological tension of being controlled, observed, and moved at the whim of others revealed to him the fragility of what he had once considered absolute safety, predictability, and power. The psychological toll of the kidnapping extended far beyond immediate fear. Hamm experienced a profound sense of isolation, the kind that seeps into consciousness and recalibrates perception. The human mind craves routine and predictability, and when those structures are removed, even the simplest sensory inputs, light, sound, touch, become tools of anxiety. Hamm's captors understood this implicitly. Windows were covered, sunlight minimized, and sounds carefully manipulated to disorient. Even the presence of the kidnappers alternated between calm and threatening, creating a continuous cycle of tension. The brain, unable to rely on familiar cues, becomes hypervigilant, sensitive to every shift in the environment. For Hamm, every creak of a floorboard, every change in the tone of a voice, every smell of tobacco or leather became vital information. In parallel, outside the confines of the hideout, federal authorities were refining their approach to crime investigation. The Hamm kidnapping represented a turning point, highlighting the necessity for scientific rigor and methodical procedure. Traditional police work, patrolling streets, relying on eyewitness testimony, and reacting to crimes after they occurred, was no longer sufficient against organized, methodical criminal enterprises. J. Edgar Hoover's FBI emphasized the development of fingerprint analysis, crime scene reconstruction, and behavioral profiling. The Hamm case became a proving ground, demonstrating that careful observation, analytical deduction, and the integration of emerging technologies could succeed where brute force and intimidation had failed. The family, meanwhile, maintained a public facade of composure and unshakable stability. The mansion staff continued their routines, masking anxiety with disciplined performance. Deliveries arrived on schedule, office meetings were conducted with standard efficiency, and public relations ensured that the family's image remained intact. To the outside world, the Hamm empire was unbroken. Behind closed doors, however, the mansion bore witness to a different reality: tension, fear, and an acute awareness of human vulnerability. The duality of public poise and private fragility became a defining characteristic of the family's identity. William Hamm Jr., once released, carried more than physical relief. He bore the imprint of psychological endurance, the heightened awareness of vulnerability, and a renewed understanding of human behavior under stress. For someone who had been accustomed to controlling complex industrial processes, commanding staff, and overseeing logistical operations, the kidnapping revealed an essential truth: control over others is always contingent, never absolute. The lessons were brutal, yet invaluable. Hamm became intimately aware of the limitations of wealth, status, and planning when confronted with cunning, coordination, and unpredictability. This insight extended beyond personal experience to his perspective on societal structures. St. Paul, with its intricate balance of legality and criminal tolerance, exemplified the challenges of governance in an era of rapid change. Prohibition had disrupted social norms, created illicit networks of opportunity, and exposed systemic weaknesses in municipal oversight. The kidnapping underscored the need for centralized, scientific, and impartial law enforcement. In a sense, Hamm's ordeal catalyzed broader social reflection, the fragility of human institutions, the dangers of unexamined power, and the necessity for accountability, innovation, and vigilance. The architectural and social design of the mansion, in retrospect, also played a crucial symbolic role. Its hidden chambers, subterranean passages, and reinforced walls represented the family's mastery over the physical world. Yet these same structures could not protect against the human cunning and audacity that manifested in the kidnapping. The lesson was stark. Structures, no matter how formidable, are vulnerable to ingenuity, observation, and adaptability when the human element is underestimated. As the investigation progressed, the intersection of human psychology and forensic science became increasingly apparent. Each trace left by the kidnappers, footprints, fingerprints, ink marks, subtle inconsistencies in timing, was analyzed, cross-referenced, and reconstructed. The scientific approach demonstrated a new paradigm. Crimes could no longer be understood solely through observation of effects. They could be dissected, predicted, and countered through empirical methodology. The Hamm case became a landmark in this evolution, bridging intuition and science, fear and understanding, chaos and control. The mansion, having absorbed the trauma, continued its silent role as both guardian and witness. Its corridors held echoes of footsteps, both real and remembered. Rooms previously used for social gathering became sites of tension and reflection. Even after the resolution of the kidnapping, the physical space retained a kind of memory, a psychological imprint of the events that had transpired. Those who entered the mansion, whether staff or family, could sense this residual tension, an invisible testament to the profound interplay between environment and human experience. The Barker, Karpus gang, whose audacity and precision had orchestrated the abduction of William Hamm Jr., represented the darker underbelly of an era defined by both opportunity and lawlessness. Each member of the gang brought a unique skill set, a combination of cunning, experience, and ruthlessness that transformed the ordinary criminal enterprise into a highly efficient mechanism of coercion. Alvin Karpas, the mastermind, possessed an almost surgical intelligence. He meticulously planned each movement, observed each routine, and leveraged insider knowledge to orchestrate the kidnapping with minimal exposure. His understanding of human behavior, coupled with a cold pragmatism, allowed him to anticipate responses and manipulate both victim and environment to achieve maximum leverage. Arthur, Doc, Barker, in contrast, embodied the unpredictable, volatile aspect of criminal execution. His presence introduced an element of fear, not just for the victim, but within the gang itself. Barker's violent impulses were balanced by Karpas's strategic discipline, creating a dynamic in which improvisation met meticulous planning. This balance of order and chaos, calculation and instinct, allowed the gang to execute one of the most daring kidnappings of the era. Their methods relied on intelligence, timing, and psychological dominance, rather than brute force alone. The planning phase was exhaustive. For months, the gang observed William Hamm Jr., mapping his routines down to the minute. They noted his departure times from the brewery, the streets he traveled, the pauses he allowed himself, even the gestures that indicated a momentary lapse in attention. They coordinated vehicles, escape routes, and safe houses. Every potential contingency, police patrols, civilian witnesses, environmental variables, was accounted for. The sophistication of their approach marked a turning point in criminal methodology, highlighting how observation, intelligence, and psychological insight could produce results that sheer violence alone could not. From the moment of abduction, the gang maintained strict control. Hamm was moved to a concealed location in Bensonville, Illinois, a small suburban area chosen for its proximity to major transport routes and its isolation from law enforcement networks. The house itself was modest in appearance, designed to blend seamlessly into the neighborhood, yet internally configured to restrain and control. Windows were obscured, doors were reinforced, and each room was arranged to limit movement and prevent escape. Light and sound were carefully manipulated, creating an environment in which disorientation became a tool of power. The psychological strategy extended beyond containment. Hamm was subjected to intermittent rewards and punishments, a controlled manipulation designed to erode confidence while reinforcing dependence on the captors. Food, water, and basic amenities were provided according to a strict schedule, yet uncertainty remained the constant. The human mind, deprived of normal cues and subjected to unpredictable stressors, enters a heightened state of vigilance and anxiety. Karpas exploited this, understanding that psychological control could be as effective, if not more so, than physical coercion. Meanwhile, the FBI, under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, approached the case with unprecedented seriousness. Recognizing the limitations of traditional policing, Hoover emphasized the application of forensic science, analytical reasoning, and inter-jurisdictional coordination. Investigators collected every fragment of evidence, from fingerprints to handwriting samples, from vehicle traces to behavioral patterns. Latent fingerprints, previously invisible, were revealed through chemical techniques, such as silver nitrate application. Handwriting analysis provided insights into the psychological profile of the ransom letters. The intersection of these scientific methods with classical detective work created a comprehensive investigative strategy, bridging intuition and empirical analysis. The ransom delivery itself was a masterclass in manipulation and coordination. Hamm's associates, guided by precise instructions, delivered the requested funds while avoiding detection. Each step of the process was carefully monitored, ensuring that the flow of money did not reveal critical information to law enforcement. The exchange demonstrated the gang's understanding of human and procedural vulnerabilities, exploiting both predictability and trust. This orchestration of logistics, psychology, and timing underscored the complexity of organized crime in the early 20th century. Within the Hamm family, the impact of the ordeal extended beyond immediate fear and disruption. The kidnapping exposed vulnerabilities long masked by wealth, privilege, and the meticulously maintained facade of control. For William Hamm Jr., the experience prompted deep reflection on the nature of power, security, and human agency. He recognized that influence and financial resources, while significant, could be rendered ineffective when confronted with strategy, audacity, and coordination by those operating outside conventional societal norms. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill, symbolic of permanence and authority, now represented both memory and caution. Its corridors, once expressions of order and hierarchy, were imprinted with the psychological echoes of absence and trauma. The family's staff, conditioned by years of discipline, observed routines with increased diligence, aware that the slightest deviation could have unforeseen consequences. Even after Hamm's release, the mansion continued to function as both sanctuary and reminder, a space where the interplay of control, vulnerability, and resilience was constantly negotiated. Legally, the kidnapping catalyzed significant changes in law enforcement strategy. The use of forensic techniques, combined with the federal reach of the FBI, demonstrated the necessity of scientific methodology in crime prevention and resolution. The Hamm case illustrated the limitations of local policing systems reliant on informal agreements and tolerance of criminal activity. It emphasized the need for centralized, coordinated, and evidence-based approaches to law enforcement. In this sense, the crime was not merely an isolated act of audacity. It was a turning point in the evolution of American policing, influencing practices and policies that would endure for decades. The trial and eventual prosecution of the Barker Karpus gang reinforced these lessons. Each piece of evidence collected, from fingerprints to behavioral observations, was presented meticulously, demonstrating the efficacy of scientific investigation in securing convictions. The gang members received sentences that reflected both the severity of their crime and the emerging standards of justice in an era transitioning from tolerance to accountability. For William Hamm Jr., the legal resolution provided closure, but it also underscored the broader societal lesson that vigilance, intelligence, and the strategic application of knowledge could protect against even the most calculated criminal enterprises. In reflecting on the broader historical context, the kidnapping occurred at a moment of significant societal transition. The United States in 1933 was emerging from the economic devastation of the Great Depression. Prohibition, which had created a parallel economy of legal and illegal enterprises had recently ended, yet the networks of influence, corruption, and opportunity it had fostered persisted. The Hamm kidnapping exemplified the intersection of these factors: wealth exposed, criminal sophistication demonstrated, and law enforcement challenged to adapt to a rapidly evolving environment. It was a case study in vulnerability, resilience, and the transformative power of scientific methodology. In the years that followed his release, William Hamm Jr. carried both the weight and the wisdom of his ordeal. The physical scars healed quickly, but the psychological imprint endured far longer, shaping his perceptions of trust, power, and human behavior. He no longer regarded wealth as an impenetrable shield, nor did he take the predictability of life for granted. Every interaction, every handshake, every seemingly ordinary routine now bore the subtle awareness that control is always provisional, that human ingenuity and audacity can pierce even the most fortified structures. The mansion on Greenbrier Hill, once a fortress of routine and authority, stood as a monument to both resilience and vulnerability. Its hidden chambers, subterranean corridors, and meticulously crafted walls had been symbols of security. Yet they could not prevent the intrusion of human cunning and audacity. And yet, in its silence, the mansion remained a repository of memory, a witness to both the family's triumphs and its trauma. The walls absorbed the lessons of fear, survival, and resilience, shaping not only the lives of those who dwelled within, but also the narrative of the family for generations to come. Beyond the walls of the mansion, the impact of the kidnapping rippled outward, transforming the landscape of law enforcement and criminal investigation in America. The case demonstrated the critical importance of science, observation, and meticulous evidence collection. Fingerprints once invisible to the naked eye, behavioral cues once dismissed, and seemingly insignificant traces of human activity became the foundation for justice. The FBI, empowered by the lessons of the Hamm case, solidified its role as a national authority capable of bridging jurisdictional gaps, overcoming corruption, and bringing criminals to account through the disciplined application of knowledge and technology. The Barker Karpus gang, though audacious and dangerous, became a case study in the limitations of human cunning. Their meticulous planning, strategic acumen, and understanding of human behavior allowed them temporary success, but ultimately, it was science, observation, and persistence that prevailed. The gang's capture, prosecution, and conviction sent a powerful message. While audacity may disrupt, it cannot withstand the structured, intelligent pursuit of justice. For William Hamm Jr., the ordeal was transformative. He returned to the brewery, to the mansion, to the life he had known. Yet he did so with a profoundly altered perspective. He understood, as few men of wealth and power ever do, that human life is fragile, that security is temporary, and that resilience emerges not from privilege alone, but from observation, intelligence, and endurance. His legacy, intertwined with that of his family, became a testament to both human vulnerability and the capacity to adapt, survive, and influence the course of history. The story of the dark secret behind the Hamm Beer Dynasty mansion is not simply a tale of crime and kidnapping. It is a story of contrasts: wealth and vulnerability, power and fragility, routine and disruption, fear and resilience. It is a narrative that bridges the personal and the societal, revealing how a single act of audacity can alter lives, challenge institutions, and catalyze innovation. It teaches that while structures, status, and predictability can be formidable, the human mind, observant, analytical, resilient, can endure, adapt, and transform adversity into lasting lessons. And so, as we reflect on this tale, let us recognize its enduring significance. Let us remember that behind every facade of control, there exists vulnerability. Behind every display of power, there exists the potential for disruption. And behind every shadow of fear, there lies an opportunity for resilience, adaptation, and understanding. William Hamm Jr.'s story reminds us that the human experience, no matter how privileged or powerful, is defined not only by circumstance, but by the capacity to observe, endure, and transform adversity into insight. In closing, the kidnapping that once shook the Hamm dynasty and the city of Satine. Paul stands not only as a historical event, but as a profound lesson in human nature, justice, and the interplay between vulnerability and resilience. It is a reminder that our lives, our structures, and our assumptions are never impervious to challenge, but that within each of us lies the ability to endure, to learn, and to emerge stronger. In the shadows of fear and the corridors of uncertainty, the light of understanding and perseverance endures. The mansion may stand silent. The streets of St. Paul may continue their rhythm. But the story of William Hamm Jr. endures, a testament to courage, intelligence, and the unbreakable will to survive.